of the...
Controversial. Compelling. The Tommy Schnurmacher Show. Hear Tommy live weekdays 9 to noon on CJAD 800.
With all eyes on Syria, all ears focused on the President of the United States, the world waiting to see what will happen next. Russia, is it to be trusted? Is Assad going to give up this stockpile of chemical weapons? Will the U.S. be forced to launch a military strike? Will it be a large one, a small one? What's going to happen? Many opinions flying about. So to find out what's really going on, we decided to speak to somebody whose motto is think for yourself. He is publisher of the TrendsJournal, Gerald Celente. Good morning.
Good morning, Tommy.
It's been a while since we talked. I'm curious, your take so far on what you heard. We saw the editorial in the New York Times from Vladimir Putin. We saw the president speaking to the nation. Your take on it?
Well, as you may know, you've been receiving the TrendsJournal for many years. We've been writing about Syria since it began and what was really behind it. And if you go back to 2011, when the Libyan crisis was developing and the Nobel Peace Prize, when it decided to launch a time-limited, scope-limited kinetic action that murdered Gaddafi, we pointed out that the only port left for the Russians and the Chinese in the Mediterranean was the port of Tartus in Syria. And at that time, the Russian military was rebuilding that port as to use it for a major base in that area. And it's really, this is more about Iran and Russia and Hezbollah than anything else. The chemical weapons, as we kept writing about this as it was developing over the last few years, every time that they would try to come up with an excuse that they were going to either Israel or the United States was going to launch an attack against Syria, it was always something about chemical weapons are being launched, they're being loaded, they're being locked, and one thing after another with no proof. So as we see it, and to answer your question about Putin and Obama, you know, I've been around for quite some time now. I'm old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I never saw anything handled so amateurishly in my life. And I've watched hours and hours of congressional hearings, both Senate and House. It's kids' time in Washington. And when I read Putin's op-ed piece, I thought everybody should stand up and applaud. And ironically, we had also done a TrendsJournal lashing out at American, quote, exceptionalism. And now I'm watching everybody here in the States bashing Putin for saying that America isn't exceptional. You know, they better get off this trip. What are they exceptional about? Well, let's look at it. They got more people in prisons than anyone else. Oh, the gap between the rich and the poor, that's exceptional. It's the widest now since 1913 and above every OECD nation. Oh, it's the most obese nation. That's exceptional. No, this is just hypocrisy. And then to make it even worse, just to give you an example, like I'm not making this up, we have this Senator Menendez over here in New Jersey, and he said he wanted to vomit when he read Vladimir Putin's op-ed piece. This is a guy, by the way, that they're bringing him up on charges, not only for doing dirty deals, but for hanging out with underage prostitutes. So that's what's going on in the States.
So what did you think? You said it was the most amateur thing you've seen in ages. Give me a list. What do you think that Obama's done wrong on this file from the beginning?
Well, this whole kiddie talk about red line. Now, what's his name? Netanyahu started this red line baloney, drawing that cartoon bomb at the UN about a year ago, and why they were going to attack Iran if they went over the red line. And the other line that they keep throwing out there is, all options are on the table. When you listen to, again, go to the Wall Street Journal, not taking my word for it, they did an analysis of what the reasons were why America was going to attack Syria based on the so-called, quote, intelligence. And they picked apart, this is the Wall Street Journal, this isn't a lefty newspaper.
No.
They picked apart every issue that they were throwing out there as to why the United States should attack Syria. It was a George Bush moment all over again. And that's the hypocrisy also, by the way. If Bush was president now, all the liberals would be screaming bloody murder. But hey, Obama's in there. This is different.
Now, I think a lot of the liberals are disappointed in what he's saying. Somebody wants to know, I think Nader wants to know if you have a new book, Gerald.
No, but we, of course, the TrendsJournal is equal to a small book each issue, so it's more timely. But again, going back to Obama, and I mean, you just listen to the things he said in his 15-minute address, and he said absolutely nothing. And then again, it's always and here's the other thing, Tommy. Of all the nations in the world, I would say that the United States has the least moral authority about talking about weapons. Okay, don't kill them with sarin gas, but hey, a couple of atom bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, well, that's all right. Hey, how about all that napalm and Agent Orange that the United States dumped in Vietnam? Well, maybe that was FDA approved, Hey, how about all that white phosphorus and depleted uranium that Americans have used to kill an estimated 1 million people in Iraq and Afghanistan? Hey, that's just in the last 12 years. But don't use sarin gas. I mean, this is the height of hypocrisy.
Daniel says Palin Putin in 2016. Tell me about, Gerald, about the relationship between Russia and Syria.
Well, again, Russia, that's their only base, the port of Tartus in Syria, and they don't want to see this overthrown. It's in their interest not to have a war over there. And as Putin points out in his piece, they got their own problems over there with the so-called Islamic fundamentalists. Anybody forget about Chechnya and those other areas? And he's concerned that they're over there now in Syria destabilizing the area, and they're going to come back home, as he points out what happened in Libya. Hey, isn't it wonderful over there? Oh, by the way, yesterday celebrating the one-year anniversary of Benghazi, that beacon of freedom, when they overthrew Gaddafi. Oh, now they just blew up the foreign ministry. And he points out that the people, and so does Agency France Presse and a number of others, pointing out that the people that are destabilizing Libya are the same ones the United States and NATO supported, the Islamist fundamentalists that have now destabilized Mali and other areas of North Africa, and he's concerned it's going to spread.
We're going to continue our discussion. More questions for our guest. He's the publisher of the TrendsJournal, Gerald Celente, on the line, 514-790-0991. He is definitely one of the best in the business, the publisher of the TrendsJournal, Gerald Celente, on the line with us. This one says, for me, it comes down to one thing, says this texter. In the history of Western society, they've just never been able to understand the Middle East power structure in society. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, but also let's call this what it is. I mean, who was controlling Syria not, probably, 60 years ago? The French were in there? Lebanon? I mean, this is colonialism. They can't get over the trip. And now, of course, the French are back in Mali. And again, that this is all this is. It's never stopped.
Now, what do you think will become of Assad? Is he going to get any punishment? What's going to happen to that stockpile of weapons? Anything?
I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to it. But who knows if there'll be a false flag or something that will divert our attention again. And by the way, that's also should be noted. In the news now, there's nothing more about the Snowden trial, Snowden leaks, rather, of all the NSA spying on us. There's nothing in the news anymore about the IRS scandals. There's nothing. What I mentioned to you before about the United States, the gap between the rich and the poor. Study came out yesterday. This is unbelievable. 1% of the population in the U.S. own 20% of the wealth, or 19.3% to be exact. This is numbers that you haven't seen since the 1913, and none of this is in the news now. So this is what's focusing, getting people's attention off the real issues. By the way, another issue: 97% of the new jobs that have been created in this past year, 97%. Temporary work. Hey, let's go to war with Syria. Hey, look at Detroit, just went bankrupt. I got to tell you, we got to take out Syria. No, this is to me, this is an atrocity. And by the way, I'm up here in colonial Kingston, New York, a stone's throw away from the Senate House, where New York became a state. the founding fathers would be turning in their grave. All of this, every one of them, no foreign entanglements, no foreign entanglements. And all of a sudden, we got these rookies out there that are starting losing wars, killing millions of people, and draining the precious resources of our nation as it's going down.
Now, but it seems to me, Gerald, that more people in your country are trying to figure that out. The number of people against anything in Syria was like at 70%. So, I mean, that's pretty clear, and that's why even Obama got nervous about going ahead with it, isn't it?
It is, and it's a very good point. And here's something else, by the way. Yesterday, of course, was 9/11. Not one word. Hey, why did they attack America? Oh, couldn't be because of the foreign policy. How dare you? Don't you know, little boys and girls, they're over there, and they're ready to come over here and attack us because they hate our freedom and liberty. Every time they see somebody online at Walmart's and McDonald's, they just go berserk. It could have nothing to do with foreign policy. Not one word yesterday as to why a lot of people around the world want payback because of America's intrusion and occupation of other countries.
Now, you were talking before about the gap between the rich and the poor in the United States, which is widening. I just want you to know that in Canada, anyone making over $190,000 a year annual salary is in the 1%.
Wow.
That's all it takes in Canada to be part of the 1%. This texter wants to know, please ask Gerald if the powers that be want Assad out of the way to install a private central bank, seeing how Syria doesn't have any debt.
A lot of people do say, they said the same thing. There is those kind of things going out there that Syria, Iraq, Libya, they were all on their own currency and off the central system. And, I don't know, but that's one of the issues that's brought up frequently.
Tell me about what kind of job you think John Kerry is doing as Secretary of State.
Nothing has changed. When Obama became president, people forget this, he brought in virtually the entire Bush team of military, beginning with the National Security Advisor to the Secretary of Defense. Kerry's just a follow-through. I mean, he could have made a good Colin Powell up there, lying his way, as Putin called him, a liar. I call Kerry a liar, too. Oh, and by the way, this is great. You can't make this up. This woman, Bagley, with an op-ed writer for the Wall Street Journal and very involved in the Syrian conflict. Kerry and McCain have been, quoting her continually, and now they're finding out that she's basically a fraud, and she doesn't have the resume that she says she has. And these are the ones that they're quoting all the time. No, it's the same club. You could call them Republicans or Democrats. How about Bananos and Gambinos?
Okay, we're going to continue our discussion. Your questions for Gerald Celente. He correctly predicted the financial chaos in the United States, many other predictions. He is publisher of the TrendsJournal, Gerald Celente, on the line with us. Gordon has a question for Gerald. Good morning.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Mr. Celente. Whatever you think of John Kerry, and, he's a human being like you and me, if it wasn't for people like John Kerry and Martin Indyk, the Israelis and Palestinians wouldn't be talking now, and I'd rather have them talking at the peace table than firing rockets at each other. That's number one. Number two, do you think that there is a possibility, and we would need the Russians involved, the Americans, for some kind of, after they destroy the weapons, to some kind of negotiated peace in Syria, because it's a terrible humanitarian crisis with all the refugees which destabilize other Arab countries. There must be some kind of negotiated peace down the road for Syrians to live in peace with each other. Is that possible?
Okay. Gerald?
On the first one about the peace talks, to me it's a lot of baloney. Nothing happened. Nothing is happening. Israel is still taking more Palestinian land. And I've heard about this peace stuff just about all my adult life. Nothing is going on with peace talks. It's been zero under Obama, and the Palestinians have been losing more land. So that on that issue. On the other one, let's not forget that the Russians have been calling. They wanted to put a conference together for the longest time to bring peace to Syria. And then you look at the people, by the way, who are behind the so-called rebels, and as you well know, who are the rebels. And there's a lot of data that shows it's al-Nusra and al-Qaeda. Now, who is behind them? Oh, the great democracies of Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Yeah, you know those people that cut off people's heads in public really slowly? Yeah, these are the ones, by the way, the same people, the Arab League, that fomented the Libyan war. So this is a sectarian war, it's a religious war, and it's a tribal war. And yes, we need peace in that area. And if the United States and Russia were honest brokers rather than either of them having an agenda, I believe it could be had.
This last text says the U.S. has military personnel in 180 countries out of 187 with the help of the CIA undermining democracy around the world. Would you agree with that?
I certainly do agree with it.
All right. Thank you so much. Gerald Celente is the publisher of the TrendsJournal.
This is the